My fiancée thought she could surprise me by having my toxic parents sit in the front row on my wedding day. But I surprised her by canceling the wedding. I'm engaged. I was supposed to marry my fiancé in a week. We've been together for 4 years, and I proposed because I thought that with her, I'd finally have a real family. We come from very different family backgrounds. I come from a broken home. My parents struggled with drug addiction, and they were far too young and immature when they had me. They had no money, no stability, and not even a real desire to be parents. To this day, I don't even know why they had me. When I was still very young, my mother handed me over to the foster care system. That period of my life was extremely difficult. I was moved from house to house many times, and in many of those places, I never felt safe or loved. Other kids bullied me, and sometimes, even the adults who were supposed to take care of me hurt me. I spent so many of those years feeling alone, scared, and not knowing who I could trust. Then, after a few years, something unexpected happened. My parents suddenly decided they wanted me back. According to them, they had turned their lives around. At least, that's what it looked like on the surface. They told me they no longer used drugs, and that they were trying to live differently. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me had wished for this for a long time, to be wanted, to have a real family. But another part of me felt confused and hurt. They hadn't been there when I needed them the most. I had gone through so much alone, and then they suddenly showed up saying they were ready now. It was the cruelest kind of lie for a kid who had never had a real family. At that point, they didn't offer any real apology. We never had a conversation about everything that had happened, about leaving me in foster care. They just said they weren't ready before, but now they were, and that was it. I felt like they wanted to move forward without ever acknowledging the past. But since no one had adopted me while I was in the system, I didn't have many options. So, I ended up moving back in with them. It was strange, returning to people who were supposed to be my parents, but still felt like strangers in many ways. You'd think that after all the years they had abandoned me, after everything I'd been through without them, they'd come back with more kindness, more care, or at least more understanding. But that's not what happened. Instead of trying to repair the damage or acknowledge the pain they had caused, they acted like nothing had happened, like we could just pick up where we left off, pretending we were one big, happy family. They never asked me about my life while they were gone. They didn't want to talk about foster homes, about bullying, or about loneliness. They didn't want to hear about the pain of feeling forgotten and unwanted. They acted like ignoring the past was enough to make everything okay. But for me, it wasn't that simple. I couldn't pretend. I carry scars from those years, some visible, others buried deep. And their decision to just skip over all of it only made the weight of it heavier. My parents would often comment on how much I had changed since they last saw me, as if it were some kind of surprise. They said it in a tone that felt more like a complaint than an observation. As if they had expected me to still be the same little boy they had left behind. After everything I'd been through, being in the system, moving from place to place, being bullied and hurt, how could I not have changed? But they acted like none of that mattered. They wanted me to smile, to be cheerful, to act like we were a normal family picking up our lives together. They expected me to be a normal, happy kid, as if I hadn't had to live a childhood completely different from what a normal child would experience. I carried so much anger, sadness, and confusion, but there was no space to express any of it. I had to bottle it all up just to keep the peace at home, because as bad as it was, going back to foster care would have been worse. And it was worse, because despite everything I'm about to tell you, the foster system had been far more brutal. That didn't make my parents' house good, just slightly less bad. If I didn't do well in school, with chores, or if I simply didn't behave the way my father wanted, he would punish me harshly. Sometimes he would hit my hands with a stick. Other times, he'd send me to bed without dinner, as if taking away food was just another way to control me. These weren't simple punishments, they were ways of using my trauma against me to keep me in line. I was always walking on eggshells around him, never knowing what might set him off. But like I said, it was still better than foster care. What hurt just as much, or maybe even more, was that my mother never stepped in to protect me. She stood by silently, saying nothing, as if she wasn't really there at all. She was my damn mother, and I had hoped that one day she'd speak up for me, tell him to stop, or even just hug me afterward. But that never happened. She stayed silent, never acting like the mothers you see on TV. I tried so hard to be good enough, to avoid punishments, and because I didn't want to go back to where I had been before. But no matter how hard I tried, I always felt like I was failing at something. Always one step away from making a mistake that would earn me a beating or something similar. So, as you can imagine, my childhood was hell. When I turned 18, I no longer had to live with my parents. I had tried to run away a couple of times before, but they always threatened to send me back into the foster care system. Living on my own as a minor was never an option. By that point, I was completely done with my parents, and everything that came with living under their roof. I wanted to leave, and I didn't care where. I just needed to get away from them, from the yelling, from the punishments, and from that constant feeling of not belonging. At the same time, their marriage was falling apart. It was as if the rage they had once directed at me was now being turned on each other. They fought constantly, loud, ugly arguments that sometimes went on for hours. They yelled at each other about money, about loyalty, about past mistakes. There was never a moment of peace in that house. The walls were thin, and everyone around us could hear what was going on. More than once, the neighbors had to call the police because the screaming got out of control. Watching officers show up at the door while people stared from their windows was humiliating and painful. I was angry that they constantly put me in situations where everyone was judging our family. When it came time for me to go to college, my parents just assumed I'd stay close to home. They expected me to choose a nearby school so I could keep helping out, running errands, doing chores, taking care of things around the house. They were getting older, and instead of encouraging me to pursue new opportunities or build my own life, they wanted me to stay as some kind of backup caregiver. But I had other plans they didn't know about, and that they wouldn't have supported if they did. I made a very deliberate choice to apply to universities far away. I wanted distance, as much as possible. I needed space, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Thankfully, I got a scholarship, which changed everything. That meant I didn't have to rely on them financially, and I didn't have to answer to them. And to be honest, they never had a college fund for me or any savings for my future. It's not like I was walking away from support they had prepared for me. They never planned my future. They only planned to keep me in their future, under their conditions. When my parents found out I was moving so far away for school, they completely lost it. They didn't take it well at all. My mother cried and begged me to stay, yes, the same mother who had allowed her husband to treat me so badly and never acted like one. But when I was leaving, suddenly she was the poor, abandoned mother whose only son was abandoning her. My father, on the other hand, got angry. Luckily, by then, I was older, and his physical intimidation didn't affect me as much anymore. Neither of them seemed to care that I had worked hard, that I had earned a scholarship, or that I was going to college, which is an achievement in itself. They only saw that I was escaping their control. So, I packed my bags in silence. I didn't say goodbye, I knew what would happen if I did, and I left. Even so, they called the police to try to get me back. But when the police were told I was 18 and had gone to college, they didn't take it seriously. They just contacted me to check if I was okay, because apparently my parents had told them I might be seriously injured. It was just a welfare check. While I was in college, I found a part-time job to support myself. My scholarship covered tuition, but not food or housing. I couldn't afford much, but even a cramped room was better than living at my parents' house, and far better than foster care. For the first time I was earning my own money I could spend on food, books, rent, or simply to feel a little safer. But when my parents found out I had a job and was earning money, they started interfering again. They'd constantly call or text asking for money, sometimes not even asking, but demanding it. When I blocked them, they crossed the line. They showed up at my college without warning, trying to guilt-trip me or pressure me into giving them my savings, which wasn't much. It was just what I had left after working and paying expenses. The only thing that finally kept them away wasn't words, it was threats. I told them I would get a restraining order against them, and that I'd sue them for harassment or anything else I could find. I had no idea if I could actually get a restraining order or sue them. But they had even less idea than I did, and I figured they'd believe me more, maybe because I was in college or something. That made things calm down pretty quickly, and I didn't have to deal with them bothering me anymore. I went to therapy, for my parents, my childhood experiences, and my college stress, and I focused on my studies and my job. By the time I graduated, it had been a long time since I'd seen or spoken to my parents, and it was the best feeling in the world. Eventually, I met my fiancée. She came from a completely opposite background, the kind of childhood you could call normal. Everyone in her family loves and accepts each other. I don't think I've ever witnessed a single dysfunctional situation with them. Sure, they have disagreements, but nothing even close to abuse. And I have to say, her parents welcomed me as if I were one of their own. They gave me a kind of family I had never had. But there was always one recurring issue between my fiancé and me. She's always expressed a desire to meet my parents and have a relationship with them. No matter how many times I told her how traumatic it was growing up with them, she kept pressuring me to forgive and reconcile. I've refused every time. She doesn't have the watered-down, sanitized version of my life in foster care and with my parents. She has the full version, the ugly, brutal details. And still, she thinks they can't be that bad and that, in the end, they're my mom and dad, so they must have enough love to change. That's why, at the very least, she's wanted to meet them. I've refused to open that door again. I always hoped, maybe even assumed, that she'd drop the subject with time. I thought she'd eventually understand this wasn't just a simple family argument. But today, everything changed. I got home after a long, exhausting day at work. I came in quietly, not expecting anything unusual. As I walked in, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My fiancée and her best friend were talking. They didn't hear me come in. I heard my fiancée tell her best friend that she had gone to find my parents, behind my back. Not only had she found them, but she had actually gone to see them without telling me. And apparently, she had also decided, on her own, to invite them to our wedding as a surprise. A complete surprise, because I was only going to find out on the day of my wedding, in the worst way possible. For her, though, it was supposed to be a good thing. She was speaking excitedly, saying she couldn't wait to see my face when I spotted my parents sitting in the front row at our wedding. Thankfully, her best friend stepped in, and in that moment, I was more grateful to her than I could ever express. She didn't just go along with it, like it was some harmless surprise. She knew part of the story. Instead, she told my fiancé exactly what it was, a bad idea. She firmly told her that doing something like this behind my back could go very wrong. She told her it was wrong to ignore my wishes, that if I didn't want to see my parents, it was for a genuine reason. She said that pulling something like this in the middle of the wedding would be starting off on the wrong foot, or much worse. But instead of listening to her friend's warning, or considering that this was a plan only she wanted, my fiancé doubled down. She started defending her actions, saying that as my future wife, she had the right to make certain decisions about what was best for me. She said she believed it would be good for me to reconnect with my parents, that somehow it would help me heal. She also claimed it was only fair for her to enter a marriage with someone who had a healthy relationship with his parents, otherwise, she didn't know how I could be a good father to our future children. She told her friend that I had just been exaggerating all along, and that she didn't believe my parents were really that bad after meeting them herself. And despite everything I had told her about my childhood, she thought that because she'd seen them for a couple of hours, or whatever it was, they were just sweet people. She went on, saying that I was a grown man now, and it was time to move on and reconcile with my parents. She did exactly what I had begged her not to do, she let them back in. And not only that, she planned to seat them front and center at our wedding. After hearing all of this, I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want my fiancée or her friend to know I had been listening. So I quietly walked out of the house without a sound. I needed to get away, to put space between us, because I was about to explode. I thought about going for a walk, but if I left my car in the driveway, it would be suspicious when they saw it. When I finally came back home, hours later, my fiancée didn't ask where I'd been. She acted completely normal, smiling, talking, behaving like always. But I couldn't pretend. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to her. I just excused myself and went upstairs to rest. Except, resting isn't an option when it's 3 in the morning and I'm still thinking about it. I keep thinking that I don't want to get married now, because she can't accept this part of me. Something so bad that it's the equivalent of me telling her she could never see her parents again after our wedding. I would never do that, because I know how important they are to her. But she can't understand how important it is to me to keep my parents out of my life. I know a wedding is a big event, but my parents are a hard no. We need to have a very serious conversation, but now isn't the time. That's why I'm writing here. Update 1. We finally sat down to talk. I looked my fiancée straight in the eyes and told her honestly that I had overheard her conversation with her best friend, the part where she admitted she had gone looking for my parents and invited them to the wedding. I wasn't going to start the conversation accusing her of lying. I made it crystal clear that I did not want my parents there. I explained again exactly why I didn't want them, and why I had cut them out of my life, things she already knew, but I reminded her anyway. This wasn't a whim or stubbornness. It was a boundary I needed her to respect, especially because it affected one of the most important days of my life. She tried to argue with me. She said she didn't mean to act behind my back, and that her intentions were good. She told me that since we were getting married and she would be my wife, she felt she had the right to know the people who raised me, as if that automatically entitled her to access that part of my life. But I couldn't accept that. I told her that being my wife wouldn't give her the right to make decisions for me without consulting me, especially decisions that touched my past and my pain. I needed her to understand that they are not a part of my life anymore, and she's not authorized to bring them back in. That's when my fiancé told me my parents didn't seem that bad and denied doing many of the things I'd said. She explained that she had spoken to them personally, and although they admitted they weren't the best parents, they now seemed different, more thoughtful, more mature, genuinely regretful. She insisted they had changed, that I just needed to see them with my own eyes. But here's the thing, I have seen them. I have heard them. And the idea that they had changed was a complete, utter lie. She talked about how time changes people, how the past shouldn't define the future, and how giving them this chance would prove to me that I wouldn't regret it. She told me they missed me, that they missed their son, and that they were so excited to have been invited to the wedding. And as she spoke, I could see that she genuinely believed what she was saying. Of course she did, they are skilled manipulators. She even compared them to her own parents, saying no parent is perfect, and that I was unfairly punishing mine after so many years. Her example? Her dad once didn't let her go to a friend's house because there was no adult supervision, and he thought they might throw a party. As if sending me to bed without food for 2 days or hitting me with a plate was anywhere near the same thing. I sat with her because I truly love her, trying to help her see what was really happening. But instead, she chose to keep defending my parents. And I couldn't take it anymore. We were supposed to get married tomorrow. But I told her it's not happening. Not just because I don't want my parents there, but because I don't want to marry someone who doesn't respect my boundaries. We're not talking about how many kids to have, where to live, or other things where compromise is part of a healthy relationship. This isn't up for negotiation. And she can't accept that, because she believes everyone needs to have parents. If my parents had never taken me out of foster care, I'd essentially be an orphan today, and it wouldn't change anything for her. She's not the person I thought I had fallen in love with. And marrying her would be a terrible mistake. I regret that our conversation didn't resolve anything, but it was the last chance to fix this. Update 2: today was supposed to be my wedding day. Instead, it became one of the hardest and most painful days of my life, but also one of the clearest. I barely slept last night. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I can't marry someone who doesn't respect my boundaries. I can't build a future with someone who refuses to listen when I speak about my pain, who acts behind my back and invites the very people I fought so hard to cut out of my life, without my consent. I can't be with someone who tells me I'm overreacting when all I'm trying to do is protect myself. This wasn't just about my parents, it was about trust, about emotional safety, about whether the person I was going to marry truly saw and accepted all of me. Because if she doesn't accept me without parents, then she doesn't accept me as I am, and she wants me to change before we're even married. My now ex-fiancée still thought canceling the wedding was just me throwing a tantrum. But early this morning, I told her again that the wedding was completely cancelled. She looked at me, shook her head, and told me I needed to stop overreacting. From our last conversation, she told me it was too late to back out. She said she was heading to the venue to meet her makeup artist and bridesmaids, and that she expected me to do the same. Then she added that my parents would be attending, whether I liked it or not, and that after the wedding, we could talk about it again. She said maybe we wouldn't have to see them all the time. And with that, she left, wearing her dress. Since she clearly wasn't listening to me, I called her parents and told them the wedding was officially cancelled. They were shocked and immediately started asking questions, wanting to know what had happened. So I told them the truth, all of it. They didn't take it well. I could tell they felt the same way my ex-fiancé did, that I needed parents or I wouldn't be complete. But I told them my decision was final. After speaking with her parents, I started getting a flood of calls from my ex-fiancé. One after another. When I finally picked up, she was screaming into the phone, crying hysterically, pouring out everything she felt. She called me a coward for canceling the wedding and said I had humiliated her in front of everyone. Over and over, she screamed that she would never forgive me for what I'd done. But then, she said something that crossed every line. With venom in her voice, she told me my parents were right to have abandoned me when I was a child. She said I didn't deserve to have anyone in my life, that I was broken, unworthy of love, and destined to be alone forever. It was cruel. And it was intentional. At that moment, I told her I'd heard enough. I told her I would pack up her things and leave them outside for her to collect, since this is my house and I pay for it, and her name isn't on the mortgage. She kept screaming, but I ended the call. Since then, my friends, who know my entire situation, have been fully supportive. But my ex's family thinks I'm wrong. Honestly, I don't care what they think. If they like my parents so much, they can adopt them. I know I made the right decision. If the roles were reversed, I would never have done to her what she did to me. If she had told me that a part of her past was painful, or that certain people weren't safe to have in her life, I would have respected that without question. When she says no to something, I listen. When she expresses discomfort, I take it seriously. That's what love and respect should look like. But when it came to me, she didn't offer the same. She didn't respect my boundaries. So, it's over. Update 3. There's not much to update about my life now, because after everything that happened, I'm definitely done with my ex-fiancée. She came to pick up her things a week later. We didn't say a single word to each other. She just took her belongings and left. That was fine by me, there wasn't much more to say. I know she was angry about the wedding being cancelled, but it's not like she left me with any other option after what she did with my parents. Speaking of demons in human form, my parents were never told the wedding was cancelled. With all the chaos of cancelling everything, I forgot about them. And they showed up anyway. When they arrived and weren't let in, because there was no wedding, they assumed it was just an excuse I had made up to keep them out. Even though, in reality, there was no wedding. I don't know if they called my ex and she didn't answer out of spite, or if the venue contacted me directly, but they wanted to know what to do with them. I told them that if my parents wouldn't leave, they could call the police, and that's exactly what happened. Especially because my parents tried to force their way into the venue, which is completely illegal. So, charges were filed. They weren't serious charges, but still, my parents called my ex to ask her to help them. And she told them that since she wasn't marrying me anymore, they weren't her family and it wasn't her problem. I know this because after she told them that, her parents called me, telling me to take care of my own because they already had enough problems paying for a wedding I had decided to cancel. When I replied, "They're not my parents, I didn't cause this problem, and your daughter canceled this wedding when she did what she did," they hung up. But not before threatening that their lawyers would be in touch with me over this. So far, they haven't. And I doubt they have a solid case against me. My parents even proved, once again, exactly what I had been warning about from the very beginning. It's not like I hadn't said it. Edit. It's been almost 6 months since that conversation with my ex's parents, and I still haven't heard from their lawyers.